After finally escaping from their strict boarding school on a quiet island, 6 boys tried to run away to a tropical paradise, hoping for a smooth sailing all the way. But instead, they were stranded in the ocean for 8 days with no land in sight. With their boat damaged and paddles lost, they had to ration their limited supplies. However, unlike the famous Lord of the Flies story, where British schoolboys end up on a deserted island, fighting for survival and eventually killing each other after being stranded, these 6 castaways became heroes. Not only did they survive, but they thrived on an uninhabited island for 15 months, using nothing but their skills and strong friendships. This is the true story of the Tongan castaways, often called the real Lord of the Flies. In 1965, on the quiet island of Ha'afiva in Tonga, in the center of the Pacific Ocean, 6 boys attended St. Andrew's College, a Catholic boarding school. They were all natives of the Windy Island. The oldest was 16-year-old Sinom Fatawa, joined by Stephen Fatai Latu, Kolo Fekitoa, and Sion Philippe Toto. The youngest, David Tevidasiola, was just 13. Tired of the strict schooling and bored with their routine, they came up with a daring plan. They decided to steal a fishing boat and sail to Fiji or maybe even New Zealand. They didn't care about the risks or where they ended up. They just wanted an adventure and to escape their dull school life. The boys had come up with their escape plan, but they still had one big problem. They didn't have a boat. Luckily, they were resourceful and already knew whose boat they would take. They all disliked a grumpy local fisherman named Mr. Taniela Luhila. So that same evening, they stole his sailboat and set off. Now that they had a way to travel, they needed supplies. They gathered 2 sacks of bananas, a few coconuts, and a small gas stove, thinking they'd catch so much fish that this would last the whole trip. In their rush, none of them thought to bring a map or a compass. This was a huge mistake. To give you an idea of how serious it was, the distance between Tongatapu, the largest island in Tonga, and Fiji is more than 750 kilometers. That's a very long way across a vast ocean filled with unknown dangers. The boys began their trip one warm evening in June. The weather was good, with just a gentle breeze and calm seas. But this is where they made their next mistake. As the night wore on, they grew tired and eventually all fell asleep. They woke up to waves crashing over them. A violent storm had hit. They tried to raise the sail and get control of the boat, but the wind was too strong, and the sail tore almost immediately. As they struggled to keep control, they heard a loud crack. At first, they thought the boat had been damaged, but it was actually the rudder that had broken. While they weren't sinking right away, they had lost the ability to steer. The boys drifted in the ocean for 8 days without food or water. They tried fishing, but it wasn't working out. They managed to collect some rainwater in coconut shells, but there was so little rain that they had to ration it, each getting only 1 sip in the morning and another in the evening. On the 8th day, they saw what looked like a miracle in the distance, the island of Ada. The island is mostly mountainous with steep cliffs and rocky beaches, making it difficult to live on even today. But for the boys, it was their chance at survival. Though it was still far away, the wind pushed them closer and closer. Eventually, they crashed their small fishing boat on the rocky shores of Ada, smashing it to pieces and leaving them bruised and cut. After about 36 hours, they finally made it ashore, with Mono being the first to step onto the island. Despite their exhaustion, they believed the island was a safer place than the open sea. Tired, the boys dug out a cave to rest in. The 2 oldest, Sean and Stephen, naturally became the leaders. One focused on guiding them on how to survive, while the other provided comfort and spiritual support, leading them in daily prayers for rescue. But none of them had much experience surviving together. Sean tried to recall the survival tips his father had taught him, but the boys were used to living in the busiest city in Tonga. They found a small cliff and set up makeshift beds underneath for some shelter while they slept. They hollowed out trees to collect water, but it took 4 to 5 days to get enough to drink. To survive, they climbed steep cliffs to catch seabirds, eating them and drinking their blood because their water supply was so low, and they couldn't get many coconuts. And without fire, they had to eat everything raw. Every day, they tried to make fire by rubbing 2 pieces of wood together, hoping the friction would spark a flame. They knew fire was key to their survival, giving them warmth, hope for rescue, and cooked food, so they kept trying, never giving up on this tedious task. Sometimes the boys would argue and fight, but whenever this happened, they decided to take a break to calm down. They would walk alone in the jungle, cry, and gaze at the ocean to soothe themselves before rejoining the group. Surviving and working together was more important than their small arguments. They agreed that after any argument, they had to spend 4 hours apart. Kolo, a musician, even made a guitar from driftwood, half a coconut shell, and steel wires they found from the shipwreck. The boys wrote songs to pass the time, and to this day, Kolo, now in his 70s, still has that coconut guitar and sings the song they wrote on the island. After 6 long months of struggle, something amazing happened. One of the boys finally managed to start a fire. This brought them their first moment of happiness on the island. The fire became the most important thing to them, and they made sure it never went out. Someone was always keeping it alive, feeding the flames. They even built a small shelter from leaves and branches, moving the fire inside for protection, and sleeping beside it using banana leaves as bedding. For the rest of their time on the island, they never let the fire die. To survive, the boys had to catch at least 2 seabirds each day to have enough food and water. One day, Mono and Stephen went to the cliffs to catch seabirds for dinner. Mono caught a few, but Stephen wasn't satisfied. He climbed down further to find more nests, but slipped and fell 40 feet down the cliffs. Mono rushed back to the others, and they found Stephen lying on a narrow ledge with a broken leg. They carried him back to their camp and set his leg using branches. The boys made sure Stephen rested until he was fully healed. Sean even joked, "Don't worry, we'll do your work while you lie there like King Taupo himself." Stephen received special care for 4 months until he could walk again. It was fortunate he had a helpful brotherhood because an injury like that could be fatal for someone trying to survive alone. The other boys took over his chores while he recovered. Every day, they explored the island, hoping to find something that would help them survive or get rescued. One day, they climbed to the top of one of Eda's flat-top mountains and made an incredible discovery: an old volcanic crater with ruins of a village that had been raided by Captain McGrath in 1863. There they found wild yucca, bananas, other vegetables, and even wild chickens that had been living on the island without people since it was abandoned. At night, the boys played a game where they tried to catch the chickens. Over time, they caught around 200 and kept them in a pen. They fed the chickens coconut scraps and cared for them, using the eggs as a steady food source. They only killed a chicken when the weather was too dangerous for hunting seabirds because they didn't want anyone else to get hurt like Stephen. After some time, the boys built a raft and tried to leave Ada, but their plan failed miserably when the raft broke apart about a mile from the shore, forcing them to swim back. In hindsight, it was probably good that the plan didn't work, as they didn't have a compass and were heading into the open sea instead of towards other islands like they thought. After spending about a year on Ada, the boys had almost given up hope of being rescued. They started to accept that they might have to live the rest of their lives on the island. They built a more permanent shelter and worked on growing the vegetable gardens that had been left behind by the villagers who lived there 100 years ago. They split their chores in pairs, working on the gardens, taking care of the chickens, hunting, or keeping the fire going. The boys also built a gym with weights, a badminton court using bird feathers for shuttlecocks, and even a pen for their chickens. They managed all of this with just a small makeshift knife, a lot of determination, and plenty of time. One day, while exploring the island, the boys discovered the bones of one of its last inhabitants, an old man. They respectfully buried him, holding a small funeral service and praying for his soul and their own, hoping to be rescued and avoid the same fate of dying on Ada. Meanwhile, Captain Peter Warner was on his own journey. Peter was the youngest son of Arthur Warner, a wealthy Australian businessman who owned Electronics Industries, the biggest radio manufacturer in Australia in the 1930s. Although Peter was expected to join the family business like many young men, he wanted to break away from that path. So at just 17, he set off in search of adventure abroad. Peter, the captain of a ship called Just David, was sailing home from Tonga in 1966. On September 11th, as the ship passed Ada Island, Peter saw a black spot on the green hills, which caught his attention because it looked like something was burning. Fires don't usually start on their own in tropical islands, especially on Ada, which he believed had been abandoned for 60 to 70 years. This made him curious. As they got closer, one of his crew members thought they heard a human voice. Peter brushed it off, thinking it was just seabirds, but agreed to take a closer look. Peter was a bit nervous, wondering if the island might be a prison or a place for dangerous criminals. So he loaded his rifle and told his crew to do the same. The burn marks Peter and his crew noticed earlier were made by the Castaway boys. After successfully starting one fire, the boys had made several more, hoping a nearby ship would see them. Unfortunately, every time they had spotted a ship, it had sailed away before getting close enough to spot them. Then they saw a ship named Just David approaching their island. The boys jumped into the water and swam to it. They talked to Peter in clear English, saying they had been lost for about 15 months. They weren't completely sure because they kept track of the days on a slate at their camp. It turned out they were only 2 days off in their count. Peter, shocked and somewhat doubtful of their story, radioed the operator in Nuku'alofa, the capital of Tonga, to report that he had found 6 boys claiming they had escaped from St. Andrew's College. 20 minutes later, the operator called back, crying, and said, "It's true. These boys were thought to be dead. Funerals have already been held, and now you found them. This is a miracle." The boys were rescued on Sunday, September 11, 1966, exactly 15 months after they left their home island of Ha'afiva for that ill-fated trip to Fiji. Even though the boys were found, their troubles weren't over. When they returned, Mr. Taniela Uhaila hadn't forgotten about his stolen boat. Despite all they had been through, the fishermen pressed charges for stealing it, and the boys were arrested when they got back. Luckily, Peter realized he could help the boys again. He thought their story would make a great Hollywood film. His plan was to make a documentary about their incredible journey and use the money to pay for the fisherman's boat, freeing the boys and bringing them back to their families. After Peter paid for the boat, the boys were to be released if they agreed to participate in the film. Doctors checked Stephen's leg and were amazed at how well it had healed. He only had a scar and his leg worked perfectly. After their rescue, the boys helped Peter make a documentary to raise money for the boat. Just weeks later, they returned to Ada to film. The documentary was shown on Australian TV in 1966. Peter was celebrated as a hero, and as a reward for saving the boys, King Tawhaha Tupou IV granted him the rights to catch lobsters in Tongan waters, allowing him to finally achieve his dream of becoming a successful fisherman. Kolo Fekito passed away in 2017 at the age of 71, and most of the other boys now live abroad in Australia, the United States, and New Zealand. In the documentary they made with Peter, the boys expressed their hope that one day the Tongan people could return to Ada and repopulate the island, not as castaways like they were, but as villagers, just like the people who had lived there before slavers destroyed the community. Sadly, despite the hopes of the descendants of Ada's original residents, the Kingdom of Tonga has not been able to repopulate the island. However, many still dream that one day the island will once again be full of life as it was for thousands of years. That's all for today's video. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments down below. Make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.